What's up? All right, as you guys migrate back over, thanks for still being here and being awake after lunch. So, we're keeping it chill. All right. So first to acknowledge all the amazing stuff that we've already heard about, can we give this morning's presentations a huge applause? And it's been super awesome being part of this. I'm really honored to be part of this lineup. And my name is Sam. I'm an assistant professor in environmental science at UC Riverside, and I'm also a co-director of the Planetary Health Center that is housed within UCGHI. And what I wanted to mention is I really love how throughout all the presentations so far, there's been a theme that's highlighting the importance of narrative and love and centering community voices and really listening to the expertise that's embedded in these individual stories. And amazingly, those same concepts are really central to advancing environmental justice. And so today, we have this amazing 3 panelists whose work really exemplify these core environmental justice concepts. And so I will introduce them to you, starting from the left is Jessica Kitso. Jessica is Diné from Black Mesa region on the Navajo Nation and has been a community organizer with Sacred Water Speaks since 2017. Jessica received her bachelor's in environmental science from Northern Arizona University and has spent most of her career working for and with her people at the local level on all sorts of topics, including watershed planning, renewable energy development, environmental justice, reclamation, food sovereignty, water protection, and energy policy. Currently, Jessica's work is all about tribal energy and how to move the Navajo Nation to incorporate equity, energy democracy, and a response to climate change and just transition strategies into their energy policies. Next, we have Amber Regner. Amber is a veterinarian and toxicologist by training and completed her training at UC Davis. Woohoo, UC's. 2014. And she recently started as an assistant professor of One Health and environmental toxicology at the School of Environmental Sustainability at Loyola University Chicago. Amber is passionate about the intimate connection between human, animal, and environmental health and well-being. And she partners with international and US-based communities at the local level, including in Kenya, Guatemala, and rural Oregon. Her work aims to provide water quality and health information to local community members, stakeholders, and regional government agencies to support advocacy and change for policies to address nutrient loading, bloom formation, and other freshwater quality degradation. And then finally, we have Carlos Martinez, who's an assistant professor in Department of Latin American and Latino Studies, and is a core faculty member of Global and Community Health Program at UC Santa Cruz. And he was trained in public health and medical anthropology. His research examines the health consequences and sociocultural implications of migration and asylum policies, environmental injustice, and the global war on drugs. His research and advocacy are aimed at promoting health and social justice among migrant communities, asylum seekers, substance users, and other marginalized groups. All right. I don't know why I stood here. I should have been over there. So now we're going to move over and we'll hear a little bit from each of our panelists about their work. And so to kick us off, we're going to have Carlos.
Hello? Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Sam. Tremendously honored to be here with you all today. I'll try to be really brief. I know we only have about 5 minutes each for these opening presentations. Let's see, does this work? If I go like that, there we go. Okay, so really brief, I will talk about my research both in Mexico and in the United States, where broadly the focus of some of my work is around kind of this idea of environmental vulnerabilities or environmental health vulnerabilities among Latinos in both the United States and Latin America. Some of my work that I've conducted in the last few years has been in Tijuana, Mexico, where I work with a few different organizations that provide various forms of services to a couple different communities. On the one hand, homeless deportee communities, so people who have been deported from the United States back to Mexico. As well as another organization that works with asylum seeker communities that are, often kind of stuck for long periods of time in Mexican cities, increasingly because of U.S. asylum policies and immigration policies. So the deportee community in Mexico consists of often people that have grown up in the United States, have had very little time in Mexico in many cases, and when they're deported back to Mexico, they often don't have real social networks to rely upon, and many people do end up homeless, unfortunately. And so there's a particular location, a really well-known kind of case study. There's been a lot of research that's been done around this community in Tijuana that kind of started to basically reside in the Tijuana River Canal. That is sort of a location where people went in order to oftentimes avoid police violence, which many of them are subjected to on a daily basis. It's also, this community, we know that, of course, the U.S.-Mexico border is a place where, often there are, drugs being trafficked through the border, and so there is, folks who are in these vulnerable positions often want to, engage in substance use, and so are also vulnerable because of that. The community that kind of is in the canal kind of fluctuates over time. Currently, there's less people there because of homeless sweeps that have occurred over the last several years, but it sort of there continues to be a homeless deportee population. And in the last few years, I worked with a team of researchers both from the US and Mexico, and partnered with a couple of organizations to look at the different forms of kind of structural violence and environmental health vulnerabilities that this community experiences. And so we partnered with an organization. Hello? I feel like it goes in now. Hello? Let's go. Yeah, thank you. Okay, that microphone is not working. We partnered with one organization that does work around, has been doing work around kind of environmental issues around the Tijuana River Canal for many years, and kind of the pollutants that are, being dispersed into the canal because of the maquiladora industry in the kind of factory production there. And on the other hand, we also work with an organization that has been doing work around harm reduction for the substance using community. And really just thinking through, that's me in the back, this idea of kind of environmental structural violence. And so, this is kind of a thread of my work, is sort of thinking through the ways that environmental injustice intersects with other forms of social marginalization that people experience, right? And so I'm increasingly kind of trying to do that work now. With a new project that I'm working on, and I'll try to end now because I know we have very little time. Looking at kind of this idea of environmental vulnerability among farm worker communities, again, Latino migrant communities in the United States that experience various overlapping forms of kind of social marginalization. Of course, many folks being undocumented and not having access often to various kinds of services, or fearing accessing services, even if people are able to access healthcare. In many cases, might not be able to or to do that. And so in this project that I'm working on with various people, including Sam actually, and people at UC Santa Cruz, we're looking at the various ways that climate change is increasingly impacting farm workers, right? Which, of course, is occurring in a number of different ways, of course, with heat stress that these communities experience, but also, the kind of environmental disasters that are impacting agriculture throughout California. So wildfires, flooding, things like that. And so we're looking at ways to, provide both study this phenomenon, but also provide forms of kind of support and information and ability for these communities to kind of to navigate this changing climate, right, that they're working in. So I'll end there. Yeah, thank you. Sorry if I went too long.
Thanks, Carlos. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the honor of being here. As Sam mentioned, my background or training is as a veterinarian and as a toxicologist, and really come from vet medicine, thinking about how our environment influences animals, other species of animals, and also the health and well-being of humans dependent directly on resources and on environmental resources. And so my research is largely focused on harmful algal blooms in freshwater sources and thinking about, particularly in lakes, and thinking about how the contamination into the lake that causes the blooms, as well as the toxicants that can be produced in the blooms, and concurrent contamination can pose both health risks and also other impacts for resource-dependent communities. So that includes the health impacts, like the algae toxins themselves, co-contaminants, fecal pathogens that can come along with nutrient loading that causes the blooms, and then thinking about impacts on livelihood of the communities at this interface, so fishing, water use for in houses for drinking water and washing and other activities, recreation or tourism, and impact on the local economy. And so I've worked in 3 locations, partnering with different organizations and entities. All of my work is not just done by me. It's a transdisciplinary amalgam of many people working together from different angles. So in Kenya, that's involved partnering with government entities, stakeholders, Kenya Medical Research Institute, Kenya Marine Fisheries Research Institute, as well as on-the-ground community mobilizers and beach management units. In Guatemala, that's involved working with local universities, healthcare professionals that are on the ground, nonprofit organizations, town councils, and most recently in Oregon, that's involved working in a rural setting with watershed councils, and also at the community level with community members that live on the lake, turned citizen scientists as well. And so just kind of blooms, if you're not familiar with blooms and just thinking about the color change that can happen in the environment, and so people that are living near shores or directly dependent on the resources without a ton of infrastructure and distance from the sources, a color change that's bright green and can have an odor and smell can change how you view the environment too and how you interact with it. And so my focus is to both provide data by engaging and provide information about the health risks and provide it to these government entities or nonprofit organizations, community themselves, to try to advocate for change of things that are causing the blooms upstream or the general degradation of water quality, and then also trying to partner directly with communities through a continuum of participatory research, and really trying to understand the local conditions, because there's similarities between the conditions that cause these changes, but you really have to understand the local ecological situation, but also the local context as well. So thinking about sustainable interventions, whether that's in the watershed, like reestablishing the wetland zones to mediate nutrient loading and to also filter out those contaminants of concern, or kind of at the household level, where thinking about what protective measures can people take in terms of reducing the harms and risks to themselves and their families. So I will just end it there and pass it along to Jessica.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to take a few seconds to introduce myself in my native language. Yad Jessica Kitso Dashajine, Trisha Diné Nishle, Sedeshkijni Bashishchin, Bilagana Dashache, Bimpatoni Dashanale, Zithlajin Date Nasha. Again, my name is Jessica Kitso. I am the community organizer for the organization Tro Nejone Ane, which translates as Sacred Water Speaks, or people also call us TNA. We are a grassroots nonprofit Diné organization. And this is kind of weird. Turn. Yeah, so our organization is based on Black Mesa. It's the northeastern part of Arizona. We are based on the Navajo Nation. We work with and for our people. It's a picture of our ED there. But our work is based, and our foundational work is on water. And I'm sure you all, well, maybe not. This is kind of before people's time, but the largest strip mining operation Peabody Coal Company operated on Black Mesa. And it was the largest strip mining company, or strip mining operation in the Southwest. And it fed a couple of coal-fired power plants in the West also. One of them, the most recent Navajo Generating Station, which closed down back in 2019. And that operation used our aquifer, the Navajo sandstone aquifer, in its mining operation and also as a mode of transportation through a slurry line that went 273 miles to Laughlin, Nevada. And then that powered Mojave Generating Station and Navajo Generating Station. And both of those entities powered most of the Southwest and some of the more southern parts of California. So that's how it's connected. Yeah, so from there, my work is based on energy. Because of that operation, you can kind of see like the correlation between energy and the use of water. And that's just been something that is perpetuated in a lot of tribal nations where there's resources that we have and companies, states even, have looked towards our nations and our resources and, have taken kind of unethical measures to get a hold of them. And energy is huge for the Navajo Nation. And we've been in everything from uranium, oil, natural gas, coal, and all of those operations require a lot of water. And that's something that is not only a problem for us on the Navajo Nation, but is a problem for the Southwest as a whole. So I just kind of took pictures. Oh, this is awkward. Can I stand? Yeah, so these are our staff members. For the longest time, most of us have been working as volunteers. And just recently, we were able to actually have staff members. We also have advisors. We also have a full board. And they are all majority Diné people. So a lot of our work is in advocacy, like I said before, which includes, a lot of meetings, a lot of taking our taking information and relaying it to our local Navajo people. So we have a lot of on the ground kind of picturesque photos. Yeah, and like I said, like Sam said before, we do a lot of other work, which includes like food sovereignty, reclamation efforts. We're now doing some more watershed planning, but my work specifically revolves around energy. So I'm going to end there, and thank you.
Thanks so much for your intros. I just have a quick note for all y'all back there at the poster area. If you don't mind just keeping your chatting a little quieter, we would really appreciate it up front. All right. Thanks so much for all of your intros to your work. So now we can have a little bit of conversation. And one of my first question, which can be like 50-day long discussion, but we're gonna kind of have you guys highlight what you feel like are essentially like your top challenges that you faced in your work when you're trying to advance environmental justice within your communities.
No, it's fine. Sure, I can start. Yeah, I got a list of challenges, but I'm just gonna stick with some external challenges that I've personally experienced this year, and a big one, always a big one, is outside corporations or outside energy developers specifically. Again, when people in the cities like California, when you guys turn on your lights, that most likely is coming from a resource that is extracted on indigenous territories. And corporations have a long history in these areas. And this year, a big one for us is hydrogen developers. They come onto Navajo land and they feel like they can do whatever they want. So that's a huge external challenge that we face. And then another one, and I'm just going to end with this one, is actually bigger organizations, bigger nonprofits. They, in relation to this hydrogen issue, bigger organizations want to find compromise, but for frontline communities like ours, it's literally life or death. And big organizations, I'm not gonna name anybody, but they feel like they wanna compromise on stuff. And that is really hurtful for smaller organizations like ours, and for people who are gonna play host to these types of developments. And I think that they're getting their job mixed up with like politicians. Politicians are there and I feel like it's their job to compromise, and it's our job as activists and advocates to draw that line and say no to some of these things. So I'll leave it right there. Did I take too long?
Thanks, Jessica. That's great. Excellent perspective. Can I just like respond a little?
Yeah,
I just wanted to also like think about when we're thinking about environment and like health and transition and like thinking about just transitions to clean energy too, and making sure we include voices like Jessica's in those conversations, and think about the impacts not just of the extraction, but also of the impacts on communities, livelihood, and also impacts on water, as she's mentioning as well. So I guess from an academic and often outside the community perspective, challenges are often finding sustained funding sources. So it's not just a drop in and go, because this type of work takes a long time. You have to build trust with communities, and so trying to sustain your presence and the work that, or the perspective that you can contribute, and not let those communities down. And there's more funding and more attention being placed on environmental justice issues, but there's also an expectation like, here's the money, fix it. And I keep saying communities, but communities are really heterogeneous entities, and there's lots of people, and people are complicated, and change and transition takes time. And so just that tension between, funding cycles and our expectations too of we'll try it once and it'll work. And so that would be the largest challenge I think I face in interacting.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think I'll just briefly add. I think kind of building off of what Amber was talking about. That I think moving from being able to document kind of the impacts of environmental harms to actually, implementing policies that protect against those things is, of course, I think just an inherent challenge for all kind of public health and global health work. But I think it's especially true when we're talking about environmental injustice. And in my case, in working with communities that experience kind of overlapping forms of kind of marginalization. I mean, the environmental health kind of piece of or the environmental harms are kind of a result of various other forms of inequality that are impacting them, which, so in many ways, like the environmental justice aspect kind of hinges on kind of other forms of inequality that need to be addressed. And of course, that's inherently very challenging, right? Especially when we're talking about these kind of large scale policy questions around migration, for example, around, deportation policy and things like that, and also homelessness, right? And so I do think that there's a growing recognition of like, what does it mean, or that these communities, that environmental justice is an aspect of what it means to be a member of this community, that these communities are being impacted by environmental injustices. So I think that's a good thing. But yeah, I think that we have a long way to go in that regard.
Thanks for your thoughts on that. I just wanted to like tie it back to some of the concepts that we heard this morning from Rohan, actually, that a lot of the ideas or like barriers that you're describing are because environmental justice is like a victim of also this political determinants of environmental injustice, or commercial determinants of who experiences environmental injustice. And so it ties really closely to the fundamental concepts of how to progress on global health. All of those concepts totally apply in moving EJ forward also. So thanks so much for bringing all of that to light. And I think then that was a great transition to kind of like, okay, here are the problems, right? Like, here are the barriers. But in all three of your work really intersects and moves toward solutions, right? Like Jessica mentioned, like advocacy and really intertwining the communication that's needed to contribute to change. So I thought maybe you guys could kind of comment a little bit about how your current work intersects with advocacy, which you've kind of touched on already, but
also how your work contributes to changing policies, doing those actions and helping address these structural vulnerabilities that create the environmental injustice that you're seeing.
We're like, yes. So I just wanted say that on this topic, if you're whatever I guess level that you're at, Amber is saying that her work, she tries to support us as advocates on the ground. And so right there's a relationship, and that involves language. A lot of the information that people like Amber give, especially to advocates like me, it's really invaluable, because the information she gives is probably really scientific, but if she can relay that in just like the most general terms, then people like me who don't have an educational background, Western educational background in like health or you know, in the various sciences, if she can relay it to me, then I can give it to the community, because right there's going to be like a language barrier, and it's really prevalent on the Navajo Nation. If Amber just like went in there and was like talking about, you know, her work, the Navajo people are going to be like, well, what the heck? How does that relate to us? And then, but if I get a hold of it, I can then relay it probably in Diné to the community, and then make those connections, because I'm on the ground, I live there. So it's really important to have people, to have that relationship, and to have people who are able to, you know, take the lived experience and then translate the new information into that.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, to kind of piggyback on that, kind of being that language barrier and being open to maybe her coming back and saying, well, that isn't the lived experience necessarily, and this is what we're observing. I definitely have had instances of that experienced, and you know, it's like a multi-directional exchange of knowledge too, and thinking about how we communicate, and maybe thinking too not just about language, but well, like one of the reasons I like to work with environmental things and shared environment animals, because it's something visceral and tangible that people experience in their own personal ways as well, and it kind of provides something to connect around and exchange, you know, emotional reactions, visceral reactions, like those photos of the blooms that can occur as well. And so kind of also thinking about those and that exchange of knowledge back and forth. And you know, from a purely like academic Western point of view, it shows you how you know, narrowly focused your science can be, and you know, leads to, I mean, it just makes for better science as well if you're just, you know, with that in mind. And so, yeah, I think maybe I will leave it there if Carlos wants to chat some.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add that I think, you know, as has already been said, that especially with environmental justice work, I mean, community-based participatory research and, you know, community-based research, engaging with communities needs to just be the default, right? When it comes to doing environmental justice work, obviously, right? Working with communities that are directly impacted, or with organizations that are kind of providing services in a way, or trying to organize that community, and really centering and uplifting that work, which is going to be really what is going to stay over the long term anyways, right? I mean, the truth is that research is very much contingent on funding streams, and researchers' careers also over time, funding comes and goes, and that can often determine how research and when research is done, unfortunately. That's still, the paradigm with which we work in. But the communities and the community organizations that are, have emerged from those communities, or that are supporting those communities, are the folks who have been there and are going to continue to be there, long after researchers are gone, right? And so hopefully research is always trying to find ways to develop capacity, hopefully, build skills and support, that kind of work in translation and, of findings, and also in really just centering voices of folks who are, being impacted in those communities, right? Bringing that, amplifying that perspective, those perspectives, yeah. So I think that's on there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I like this continuum of what you all mentioned, starting with what Jessica said, that one of the major ways that we as academics or researchers can actually translate our work into action is fully collaborating, right, with advocates like you, where we talk and take the time to build these relationships and get to know who we are as humans and care for each other, and then that will allow us to actually work effectively together and communicate and be on the same level with just the language itself. And I think it ties all the way back to what Carlos just mentioned. There are these institutional structures that constrain us from taking the time and using our funding in the appropriate ways to make sure that our research does translate to action, because there are these arbitrary constraints, right? Like that our grants last 18 months, right? Like how are we ever gonna really build a true relationship with communities and have co-production of research questions when that's the timeline? And that we were just discussing that the funding can get really constrained on how we even disperse money to participants. So those are all kind of, major structural things within our own institution that we really need to completely change, and not just slightly reform, completely break it down and do it all over again. So I see the 5-minute sign. So I think with that, we can kind of see if we have any audience questions. And I'm looking at Sun, who's pointing over there. Oh, yeah. So if anybody has questions, please head on over to the mic. Hey, Dele.
Hi, thank you very much for an amazing panel. I am struck sometimes by our assumption that in most communities, the thinking is homogeneous, there is no dissent. And I'm concerned about the transition to alternative energy, a greener future, and the same business model that we are using and we've been using that caused the problems remain with us. So the example of hydrogen is important. Lithium mining has come up as another big divisive potentially, but people argue that they need jobs. They want to have access to the economy. And those of us concerned about health and saying, well, let's wait a minute and think hard about this. So I'm really curious about the strategies within communities before we come in with the science that this is good, the new chemistry is good for you. How do you solve dissenting viewpoints in communities, in the local language, so that we're not coming in with the next good thing that may become problematic in a few years?
Thanks, Dele. Jessica, I think that's you.
Yeah, our approach has been for hydrogen in particular. What has helped us is getting out there in the community. Well, we live there, but I mean, like, Navajo Nation is so big. There's 110 different chapters. 13 of those chapters are going to be affected by hydrogen development and hydrogen transportation. So it was really important to get out there as soon as possible, because there's very limited ways people get information on the Navajo Nation. In our case, a lot of people listen to a specific radio station, and we only have one newspaper. And being out there to the 13 chapters first, before the companies started coming, has been really helpful for us, because we start giving people information. Information disbursement is super important. Getting people at all different levels. People have different education levels. Most have only gone up to high school. So really just simplifying the information. The other thing is that giving communities, empowering communities, not only with information, but ways that can make energy development better for them. Like you said, just because it's green doesn't mean that it's going to be good. It can be very exploitative, the same way that coal and fossil fuel is. And so giving people that language and giving people the tools to be able to ask, like, how is this really going to benefit us? And when companies say, like, oh, you're going to get jobs, you have to like tell the community what kind of jobs, because most of them are like specialty jobs, and people don't have that background. So a lot of people that come in basically to get those jobs are from the outside. That's just one example.
Do we have other questions? You can head on over to the mic. Hey.
I have one. No, I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. Something you touched on was kind of about funding and how that can kind of be fickle and go away, and also, like, in the face of climate change, I was just wondering kind of how you touch upon, like, community resilience building to give them strategies that are more long-term solutions for the future.
It's a great question.
You want to take it? Okay, sure. Well, I think I can speak to the current project that we're really in the early stages of doing with farm workers here in California around climate change. And a big part of that project, as I said, is documenting kind of the various ways that climate change is impacting the health of farm workers, but also we want to develop tools that help farm workers, on the one hand, I think understand the potential risks if they, many already do, I think, but, to be able to have kind of real-time sort of information available to them, also in their languages, whether that's Spanish or potentially even indigenous languages, about kind of what is happening, particularly like in disaster situations. And so, I think to the degree that we can use our research to create sort of tools of intervention that can hopefully stay in communities and be controlled by communities over the long term, you know, that is, I think, what the kind of work that we need to be doing is not just these kinds of, you know, researching the harms, but also thinking about interventions to prevent those harms.
Kind of piggybacking on that, kind of thinking about that each community is going to be different, each environmental scenario or situation will be different, and both thinking about, you know, for example, urban and rural settings, or and how different infrastructure will be affected, that also then influences health risks or other determinants of health, and I think kind of focusing at that very like zoomed in level, but also sharing those experiences and potential interventions to across different sites, and lending insight from those different perspectives.
We have another. Hey.
Yes, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and the panel. My name is Daniel Maweo, Global Action in Nursing, Malawi. My question goes to Carlos and the good work. Thank you for the good work you're doing. Just wondering, the structural violence seems to be, you know, I thank you again for bringing structural violence and linking it to the environment, because again, we rarely see some of these linkages coming and sort of seeing how some of the upstream factors again go down all the way to the environment. And I'm just wondering how probably you dealing with some of these, or whether there are any interventions you bringing on board to sort of just address some of these structural violence factors which are, again, leading to these Latinos being, again, in the situation they are and affecting the environment, and the environment, again, affecting them in the way it is. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. And you know, just to say, like, structural violence, it might not be a term that is that folks are familiar with, often trained in public health. It is a term that we like to use a lot in medical anthropology, very much popularized by people like Paul Farmer. Really just as a way to describe kind of these big scale structural systems of inequality that are difficult to see often, right? They are forms of harm, forms of violence that are not physical, but are often invisible to us, but are important to articulate. Yeah, I think it's sort of a bit of a big question that I don't think we have really time to get into all of it, but I guess all I'll say is that, you know, certainly in my work, and it sounds, you know, I think with kind of the overall kind of tendency of environmental justice work is to really always point towards the systemic factors and systemic changes that are going to need to happen, right? And so part of our work is always, you know, recognizing that simple, you know, there's always a kind of a scale of change, right? That we need to point to, and that there are certainly small changes that can be made that can improve people's health on the day-to-day, and we do need to do those things. But we also always need to be pointing towards the kind of bigger structural changes, even if we know that that's not reasonably gonna happen within the next year, 5 years, or even 10 years, but always just to make it clear that we understand that these structures are responsible for these kinds of inequalities that we're seeing and harms that we're seeing. And so anyways, that's, you know, it's hard to work within these multiple scales, I think, of change, but I think that's sort of, that's where public health has always been, I think, really, really helpful to be able to articulate that change has to happen in multiple levels, in multiple different time scales.
Great, thanks so much, Carlos. We have another question.
This is for, first for Jessica Ahehi, for a very nice, thank you for a very nice talk to all of you. Jessica, how do you galvanize your people, your constituency? What is the trigger for getting, there are so many things on the plate that they have to worry about. How do you galvanize them to put energy and effort into this type of inequity?
I was gonna say, can you define galvanize? I'm sorry. How do I push my people to take those steps? The community is really receptive, especially to, well, I just kind of, making this kind of about me, when I go out to the community, they tend to be very receptive to me, even though I'm Diné. I do have, my grandfather was a white person, and so I have lighter skin, and I hate to say it sometimes, but communities, you know, it's the thing where when you see somebody and they're lighter skin, like white is right? And it's really prevalent in our communities because that's all that Navajo people have been exposed to, and especially these corporations who come on to our land and say like, we're gonna give you jobs, we're gonna give you, X, Y, and Z if you relinquish, your water or your resources. And that's the only kind of development that has ever happened. And so our communities are just like, yes, you're a white person, so obviously this must be good. And that has been going on for the longest time, until now, I would say. So I'm kind of like bridging that gap a little bit. Like I go into my communities, and I've lived there all my life, and so that probably helps, but also like the way that I look also helps. And then education, having a Western education, and then also having that lived experience of being on the Navajo Nation. And that has really been beneficial, that combination for me specifically, in pushing people forward, in pushing communities forward. And I've got, with this hydrogen stuff, I've had a lot of experiences this year where, this year where I did the work, I gave them all of the information, and then when it came time that the company people came in, they had all the questions, and I was able to sit in the back and watch as they were kind of grilled a little bit by the community. So thank you.
Excellent. I just want to say thank you so much to all three of you sharing your knowledge on all of your work and just bringing a lot of these environmental justice topics. And hopefully it sparks a bunch of conversations amongst you all, but let's thank everyone here for a great discussion. Thank you so much. I'm gonna hand it over to Sun.
Great, thank you all so much, Jessica, Amber, Carlos, and Sam. Thank you. We are going to switch gears to our second panel. It's the Reproductive Health and Abortion Rights panel. It will be moderated by